Hi everyone, this is Grace, and today I'll be walking you through how I made this strawberry lemonade set. So let's go. First up, we have the mason jar for the strawberry lemonade. So, first up is we're going to use an edible marker here to mark off all the different sections of this cookie. So, as you all know, I don't do things that are not necessary, and I usually don't sketch things out, but in this case, I highly recommend sketching things out because it's important that you place everything in a good spot. It doesn't have to be all the same, but just like the difference between the lemon and the strawberry, there needs to be like a quarter of an inch in between them, and I think that's just easier to make sure you get right if you sketch it out first. What I'm doing here is outlining the cookie, and I do want to try to outline in the same color as the flood. Not totally necessary. You can certainly just outline in one color, but if you can, you might as well outline in the correct color, because when you look at it from the side, if it's not the same color as the flood and or you just didn't do a very good job covering it up, then you can see the color. It's really not necessary to outline the lemon and the strawberry in yellow and red. I just like to do that because it gives me a good visual cue of what color to flood each of them. And I did do this in a very specific order because I tried doing the strawberry first, but because the lemon takes longer, it just gave more time for everything else to crust, if that makes sense. So it's also important here to use a thin flood or even extra thin flood, but I think I went with a thin flood for this because I had other things in the set that I didn't want to use an extra thin flood for. I know. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are my special terms for icing consistency. Go check out my video on icing consistencies to know what I'm talking about. Right. So, moving quickly here. This is a pretty large cookie. It's 3.75 inches, but I think, or maybe it's 4. I think it's 3.75. But it's pretty wide, so like that's a lot of surface to cover, and we're doing all wet on wet here. The name of the game is to work as quickly as you can. So like with those lemon seeds, with the outside part of the lemon, I cleaned off my scribe after every pull because that's important for the effect. But for those seeds, I did not clean my scribe off. I just went boom, 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 get it done. Move as fast as you can, because when you have to clean off your scribe, obviously that makes it take longer every time. And then here, I'm actually using a soft peak to do these seeds because I just felt like the flood was too messy. Now, this is definitely a more advanced move, so the easier way to do it is to just use the white flood, do a dot, and then use a scribe to pull from the center of the dot just barely. You'll see it's very easy to get a good little peak on that seed. And then this next step, this is the pinkish color flood. And what's important here is that I'm actually laying that line on top of the edge of the red and the yellow flood. If you don't do that, you're going to have separation in between your pink and your strawberry and lemon. We're going for a total flat look here. That's really important. Especially if your piping consistency outline is pretty thick, you really have to make sure that you're covering that up when you do this pink part. And again, name of the game is to work as fast as you can. And I'm looking at myself do this and I'm like, couldn't I have worked any faster than this? I don't know. With a wet on wet this large, you want to do like the next flood next to the wettest part, if that makes sense. So that's why I waited to do this white part at the top last. Let's say I had done the lemon strawberry white part and then the pink. The lemon definitely would have crusted by then. No bueno, because when that happens, then it wouldn't have had a nice seamless look as it dries. So now it has crusted, and we're just adding some finishing details on top. This is a soft peak piping consistency. Just doing like a little kind of romantic, elegant little tie here. I like to do the tie first because it kind of grounds the top of the mason jar well, and then I'm just adding these finishing details. The top and the bottom lines just cross over center for the most effective look, in my opinion. And there we go. Next up, we have the strawberry basket. So again, we're going to be marking out the different sections of the basket. It doesn't matter what color edible marker you're using, honestly. I usually just like to try to use one that kind of goes with the theme of the set, which is why I'm using red for this one. I've never had experience with an edible marker bleeding through white icing. It's always been a fear, but that's never happened, so just sidebar on that. This here is red soft peak, and I'm using my Thingamajiggy tool by the Cookie Countess. I don't think anyone else makes this exact thing or sells it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the only company that sells it. And you can also use just like a kitchen knife. Just anything flat is good. I used to use a paintbrush for that until I discovered live in a class when I was trying to do it with a flood consistency. Using a paintbrush made it way too thin and too transparent, but when you use like a Thingamajiggy or a knife, oh my god, so much better, so much more coverage. So what you saw me do there was I outlined and I squiggled with a soft peak. Important not to let the squiggle dry. Squiggles are one way to prevent craters. And in this case, I just went with it all wet at the same time. This is definitely like the advanced approach. What would be a little bit easier is if you outlined it, let the outline dry, then do the squiggle. Don't let the squiggle dry and do the flood. But I like to live on the edge, people. Live on the edge of cookie decorating. Who am I? Okay, so we let that top portion crust, and at the same time, the red kind of had a chance to dry for the most part. It's very thin, so it should dry pretty quickly. And then we are doing the cutouts here. And again, I'm living on the edge. I don't like to let my outlines dry when I'm doing a cutout, because if you flood when the cutout outline is still wet, then you can kind of get a better marriage of the outline and the flood, a more seamless look, which I really like. Not necessary, obviously. I am rocking the squiggles again. It's important with squiggles. Couple things. Don't flood all the way to the edge, or squiggle all the way to the edge. Give yourself a little bit of a border. Make sure it stays pretty flush to the cookie. If it sticks up too much, like even just the end of it, it can definitely poke through your flood, which has absolutely happened to me before. Whoops. Yeah. Okay, so you need to let this dry quite well. It should be totally smooth to the touch, and you should be able to apply light pressure with your finger, because that's what you're doing here with this, what am I doing here? Flood. Bear technique. I used a flood technique in what I piped. Flooding will just give you less texture. Piping will give you more texture. I wanted less texture. And I'm using this paintbrush. Pretty sure it's from the Sugar Art. And just dabbing up and down. I always prefer, whenever possible, to do bear technique on the section before you do the rest of the cookie. Now, you could absolutely do the strawberries, and then once the basket is dry enough, do the bear technique. But getting that seam between the strawberries and the top of the basket clean when doing the bear technique is very challenging. Same deal, like if you're painting metallics, I always like to paint metallics before doing the section next to it, if I can. If I can't for whatever reason, not a big deal. It's just less stressful to do it this way. So the outside strawberries, I'm actually outlining and flooding with a soft peak. So this is called, or at least I call it, pressure pipe flooding. And the reason for this is the thicker the icing you use, the less likely it is to crater. And I figured this would probably crater. And so I wanted, I could have done a squiggle technique under here, but I did this for a class originally, and I wanted to just throw in an extra technique. So this is one technique to prevent craters. It's important here that you're using a true soft peak, because if you're not using a true soft peak, that will not go well. So you let the outside strawberries crust, and then I'm doing my massive squiggle in the middle. And this is actually a flood consistency. So this is just a simple flooding in sections situation. So you flood alternate sections, they crust, and then you do the remaining sections, and that gives you definition in between the sections, which is just a super cool look. We're going to let that crust over, and then I like to do the seeds before the leaves. Why do you ask? Just in case the leaves want to cover part of the seed. I don't know. It just makes most sense to me. So this is a soft peak. It's the exact same thing I was doing on the wet on wet strawberry, except obviously these strawberries are dry, or at least crusted. Here you're piping a dot, you pull away, and as you're pulling away, you release pressure, which is what gives you the little peak on it. Then I'm going to turn this cutie patootie around. Always turn the cookie to make it easier on you. I very rarely turn my cookies in videos, only when absolutely necessary, and that's because I'm filming. If I'm doing this, like the rest of the cookies that I do, I turn them as much as I need to, but I've just found, I'm going for satisfying videos, and cookies that are constantly turning around are not as satisfying to look at. That's also why you'll rarely see me use a cookie swivel. I only use a cookie swivel on camera when absolutely necessary. So I'll talk about the leaves again at some point, because I do those a couple more times. Next up, what do we have? The lemon duo. So this is just a simple extra take on a lemon with leaves. I just wanted to do something a little bit different. And what can I talk about here? Let's talk about colors. So for this set, my colors are pretty simple. Again, I was doing this for a class, so I always like to keep my colors as simple as possible. Like that basket is, most people will do it in a green or a teal, because this is not, I did not come up with this theme myself. But I already had the red, pink, yellow, white. That's 4 colors. So to have 5 would not have been catastrophic, but I figured let's roll with the 4. So to color these, the yellow here is lemon yellow, and I use Americolor. And then the white I do actually color with gel coloring, or Americolor gel coloring in bright white, or the Sugar Art Master Elite in white. That's a highly pigmented powder coloring. And then the pink and the red. So the red is the Sugar Art Master Elite in red rose. And then the pink is just a less saturated version of that red. And then the last step I always do when I'm coloring my icing right before I use it is I add a tiny bit of each color to each color, like a pea size-ish amount. I tend to add a little bit more these days. But what that does is it makes the colors more harmonious and like a family instead of just friends hanging out, if that makes sense. This next thing, I don't know. I've never seen anyone else do this specific technique. This just makes sense to me. I don't know. So I wanted lots of tiny, tiny little dots in different sizes. So this is actually the yellow flood, and I'm using my scribe to just get a bunch on the end of my scribe, and then I'm tapping it to get this cute little texture. I don't know. I like it. The next thing I'm going to do are the leaves, and this is a special leaf cut, which if you've taken my classes, I do have some nice demonstrations on how to do the leaf cut. Essentially, you're cutting a V into a tipless bag, or a thicker plastic tip bag, that's fine too. And voila, there we go. Okay, we have the strawberry up next. I think we have just 2 left here, strawberry and the lemon slice. So nothing crazy here. This is outlining this again. It's always important, or at least I recommend, when you're doing a one continuous outline, any sort of shape like this strawberry or circle, anything that's particularly round, it's always good to start and end your outline somewhere that's going to get covered up. So I started my outline at the top because that's going to get covered up by leaves. I wouldn't want to start it like on the side or even on the bottom because the bottom is rounded. So just a little tip there. And I didn't bother, it's a surprisingly small strawberry. You can't really tell on camera, obviously. I did not bother doing any squiggle because I didn't think it needed it, and it doesn't look like it does. I just want to say, sidebar, I always feel like my strawberry seeds look stupid. Like, the spacing of them somehow always seems to look off. I don't know. I look at everyone else's strawberry seeds and they look so cute, and I look at mine and I'm like, what's going on here? Anyway, so again, moving my strawberry to make my life easier, piping these leaves. It's important when piping or cutting the leaf tip to make sure it's a very sharp leaf, like a sharp V, not like a wide V. I really need a better way to explain that. If you make it a really wide V, like a not very deep V, you want it to be a deep, narrow V. If it's wide and not so deep, then it will just make the opening in your bag bigger, which means more icing is going to come out, and you're going to have very thick leaves. So just keep that in mind. This lemon slice is the last one. Normally I like to start with this so you can just see the lemon technique, because it's the same thing that's on the strawberry lemonade mason jar. And there's a cutter for this in the set, but you can just take a circle and cut a circle in half. You certainly do not need to buy the cutter, but it's in the set. Anyway, so we've got the wet on wet here. I will say from experience, it's really helpful to add white food coloring to your white icing for this design, because I found when I don't, the white doesn't pop enough. And even here, I feel like I could have added more white coloring to my white icing. So just the sidebar there. You can see here for this technique, it's really important to clean off your scribe and to make sure you're pulling from the outside of the line. If you pull from anywhere on the inside or even just at the start of the line, you're not, the white line I should say, you're not going to get that beautiful pull that you see, right? So here we've got the dots. I think for this one, I will actually clean off my scribe after every seed. Let's see. Yep, I do. If you don't clean off your scribe, if I pulled a seed without cleaning it off, I'd have a little bit of yellow icing residue on my scribe, and then there would be like a yellow dot in the middle of my seed, which is not ideal. So there we go. That's the last cookie in this set, this strawberry lemonade set. I mean, this is one of my favorite sets I've ever made. Again, not a unique theme, but finally time that I made my own. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you make it yourself.